Signatures of American civilization are all around us. Those hammocks on the rolling savannas, or the mound islands you see in the swamps and deltas of the southeast, they're now byproducts of hurricanes. They're engineered vaults of abundance, the signature footprint of a civilization that built its economy on biodiversity and water. Descriptions from early travelers talk about mile-long groves of oranges glowing like lanterns, magnolia trees like white-pillared temples, a vine so fragrant you could smell them before you saw them. It was a curated paradise. Imagine being a local or a traveler. Step into one of these hammocks and you'd feel it immediately. The air would smell like citrus blossoms, magnolia, figs, and sweet gum. The ground is shared by live oak, laurel, and palmetto. Aromatic resins drift in the air, keeping the mosquitoes at bay. Bears get fat off the fruit, deer graze on the acorns. Birds call from every level of the canopy. Everything you see has a purpose: food, medicine, timber, fragrance, and it's not random. It's planned biodiversity. And consider this: one hammock, just a few hundred acres perhaps, could be worth tens of millions of dollars in today's money, and it would require minimal labor to maintain. A hedge fund manager's dream business. Now, trace the Swanee down through the Gulf Delta, where you'll find some dome-shaped islands, which official science will tell us these are natural storm splits from the hurricanes. But here's the problem. Storms tear things apart via tidal waves that crush inflexible man-made structures. After the next hurricane, count the number of uprooted trees and compare that to your count of uprooted homes. And all those mounds in the shallows, those are engineered shell mounds intentionally covered over with soil and horticulture centuries ago. What we see are the remnants, and yet their tops still protrude above these high tides, islands of tree varieties in a field of saltwater grass. Then take notice of how the straight line canals connect perfectly into the snake-like winding creeks, producing a suspiciously natural efficiency for water transport. And so the shell mounds are not hurricane remnants. The straight canals are not randomly natural, and the snake-like rivers are not following physics' path of least resistance. These islands and hammocks are remnant architecture of the previous Indian civilization that engineered wealth by clever integration of land and water. And then around the saltwater coastlines of Florida are the supposedly wild mangrove islands, which I suspect were designed supply points in a region-wide hydroarchitecture of transport, facilitating trade, daily life, and travel lodging. Saltwater zones like the 10,000 Islands, Marco Island, and Biscayne Bay had networks of shell foundational islands acting as travel, trade, and security stations. These shell mangrove islands provided marinas where travelers could dock, grab fruit, collect some medicine, and rest. Larger pods would have been large box shipping ports where cargo was inventoried before being transferred to larger sailing vessels for distribution worldwide. So why did the European finance corporations liquidate this perpetual abundance machine? Well, these dynastic family trusts came with European loans to form corporations of real estate development, canal dredgers, tree cutters, and steamboats and railroads. And here's how their trust liquidation machine worked. They formed the Internal Improvement Fund via congressional legislation, which allotted 20 million acres of Florida wetland to a board of 5 trustees who were connected to the dynastic trust families. The board then held title from Congress contingent on drawing these lands. The way they profited was this: banks would perform a twofold service that eliminated their risk and guaranteed capital gain. They would promise the trust a new higher property appraisal value upon the trust drawing the land, and then they would provide the trust with the money via loans to accomplish this goal. The bank books the profit on interest payments from the trust while the work gets done, and then the trust books the profits on the increased appraisal price, and they both roll the loan principal into the next liquidation project. It's an internal feedback loop and a built-in guarantee, infrastructure financing that creates the asset value which they monetize for personal gain. The public pays for the drawing. Private syndicates profit. The loan principal rarely gets retired. It just moves to the next tract of swamp, the next drainage project. It's not a one-time sale so much as a permanent extractive rhythm. And don't forget how the trust got a hold of that 20 million acres through military displacement of the indigenous American Indians. So the land they're using as collateral didn't really cost them a dime. So this is why liquidation is the perfect word, because it means the opposite of liquefy, which means to turn something from dry into something wet. So they liquidated the land, and not in the better ecosystems, but rather in the dry squares monetizable as a commodity, buildable lots, timber plantations, agriculture as monoculture. The system is explicitly anti-water. Floods, swamp, and tidal ecologies all treated as waste to be erased. And there's a precedent in England. The same dynastic trusts that were doing this in Florida began doing this after the English Civil War in the mid-1600s. Parliament targeted the fens of eastern England with the Drainage Acts, and they appointed Huguenot Protestant Calvinist trustees to manage these projects. And just like the indigenous Indians in the southeast of the United States, the English locals, known as the Fen Tigers, resisted for decades. They tore down dikes, they burned pumps, and they reflooded fields. But eventually they lost their ancestral lands, their commons. So in both Great Britain and the United States, these European dynastic trusts intentionally destroyed centuries of perennial yields shared communally in order to create a cash flow yield they could control, keep account of, and concentrate trillions of dollars of into their families' bank accounts. And this $1 trillion yield to their families, that is the true animal spirits that innervate Wall Street, hedge funds, and publicly listed corporations to invest their wealth, time, and family members into leadership of religions, corporations, nonprofits, governments, and militaries.